You think you are safe in the dark, sitting in front of a screen, watching a horror film unravel. You tell yourself it is fiction, performance, something that happens to someone else. Yet Hereditary does not behave like a story, it behaves like a ritual. The lights dim, silence spreads like incense, and suddenly, you are no longer an observer, you are a participant. The camera is a circle enclosing you, the screenplay a grimoire recited in images, the sound design a chant that works not on your ears but on your nerves. You do not watch, you're bound. The story lures you in with grief. A family unraveling, a house that feels more like a tomb than a home. But the deeper you go, the more you realize the film is not simply telling a tragedy, it's constructing a ceremony. Every cut, every lingering frame is not narrative, but invocation. The cult within the film is not confined to its characters. You, sitting in the dark, eyes fixed, attention surrendered, are already seated among them. And at the center of this ritual waits a king, Paimon, one of the 72 demons of the Ars Godia, crowned in secrecy, enthroned not by believers in cloaks, but by the gaze of every viewer who cannot look away. His sigil is hidden in frames, his crown is foreshadowed long before it gleams. And his possession is not only of Peter it is of anyone who surrenders identity to the ritual. So what if Hereditary was never meant to be entertainment? What if it was always a spell? What if you have already signed the pact, not with blood but with attention? The crown glitters faintly in the dark. The question is, who wears it now? Evil rarely presents itself as chaos. More often, it arrives as structure carefully ordered, meticulously arranged, hidden beneath symbols of stability. The Ars Godia understood this, which is why the 72 spirits are not depicted as wild beasts but as rulers, kings, dukes, and presidents. Among them, Paimon is one of the most exalted, a crowned king who commands legions with the blast of trumpets and the gravity of authority. To summon Paimon is to enter into the architecture of evil, not a random haunting, but an encounter with hierarchy itself. In Hereditary, this architecture is disguised as family drama. The Graham household looks like any other, yet every room is constructed as though it were part of a dollhouse, carefully lit and framed, each movement of the characters observed from a godlike perspective. This is not domestic realism. It is architecture masquerading as cinema. Every frame is a chamber, every corridor a passage of ritual. What looks like a simple home is revealed as a temple. The cult that waits in the shadows of the story is not improvising. They are following a blueprint. The death of the grandmother is the cornerstone, the cracks in the family, the foundation, the deaths of children, the scaffolding. And above it all, unseen yet inevitable, is the throne reserved for Paimon. This is the terrifying insight. Possession is not a sudden invasion, but the completion of a design. The architecture of evil is patient, incremental, ritualistic. The Godia describes Paimon as arriving with a sound of trumpets, a spectacle of noise that overwhelms the senses. In Hereditary, this is inverted into silence so profound it becomes oppressive. Long stretches of quiet, broken only by a clicking tongue, function as architectural pillars within the ritual. The house becomes a cathedral of silence, each click an echoing trumpet call. Evil here is not chaotic, is structural, codified, ordered. Hierarchy is crucial. The cult does not operate as a mob, but as a system. Every member has a role. The grandmother as matriarchal priestess, Annie as unwitting officiant, Charlie as sacrifice, Peter as vessel. Even the audience has a place in this design. By watching, by attending to every symbolic detail, you fulfill the role of witness. In demonological tradition, a king is nothing without subjects. In cinema, the king is nothing without viewers. The architecture extends outward from the screen into your own participation. The crown, recurring throughout the film, is not a mere prop, but the keystone of this structure. It signifies completion, the final stage of coronation when Peter ceases to be himself and becomes throne for another. In the Godia, Paimon wears a crown as sign of dominion. In Hereditary, the crown passes from symbol to object, from foreshadowed drawing to physical placement on the boy's head. The architecture is finished, the temple is built. The king is enthroned. What makes this architecture unsettling is its resonance with real systems. Families, cults, governments, corporations operate by hidden blueprints. Rituals of obedience, sacrifices disguised as necessity. Hereditary is horror not because it invents demons, but because it reveals how structures consume individuals. The Graham family's destruction is not random, misfortune it is planned demolition. Every crack, every loss, every silence contributes to the architecture of enthronement. In this sense, Paimon does not arrive from outside. He was always present in the design, waiting in the walls like an architect's shadow. The cult does not summon him so much as unveil him. And the audience, drawn deeper into the ritual, becomes complicit. You are not watching a house collapse. You are watching a temple rise. This inversion of perspective is essential to the architecture of evil. Where we see chaos, the system sees order. Where we see tragedy, the cult sees fulfillment. Where we see the collapse of identity, Paimon sees coronation. Architecture is elegant, merciless, inevitable. It is not the madness of demons, but the precision of design. And this is why Hereditary lingers long after its final frame. You sense that you have witnessed something more than narrative. You have seen the blueprint of possession, the step-by-step raising of a throne. The film itself becomes part of the architecture, a ritual structure that ensnares its viewers. To recognize this is to feel the weight of the crown hovering above your own head, the architecture stretching beyond the screen into your life. For evil, in the goetic sense, is not random cruelty. It is organization. It is hierarchy. It is architecture. Once you see the lines of that design, you cannot unsee them. The astral and the cinematic share one common law. Neither speaks plainly. They communicate in symbols. In the grimoires, demons are bound by sigils, strange glyphs of spirals, crosses, broken lines that function not as decoration, but as command. In Hereditary, Ari Aster builds his ritual the same way. Every scene is haunted by symbols, some blatant, some whispered into the subconscious. Each operating as an occult signature that bypasses intellect and enters directly into the nervous system. To watch the film is to chant without words. The most obvious of these is the crown. It appears first in drawings, then in subtle foreshadowing, and finally, as an object placed upon Peter's head. In the Godia, the crown is Paimon's sign of kingship. In the film, it becomes the keystone of the ritual, the final moment where identity is annihilated and authority is transferred. The crown is not an ornament, but a sigil of sovereignty. It does not bless, it binds. Its golden gleam is the seal of the pact. Equally striking is the triangle, carved into floors, etched on walls, drawn into the very structure of the house. The triangle is one of the oldest ritual forms. In alchemy, it signifies fire. In ceremonial magic, it marks the space into which entities are summoned. To place it beneath a body in Hereditary is to declare that the body itself is invocation, that the human frame is vessel. The audience may register it only as shape, but subconsciously it functions as seal. To sit within the triangle is to be already offered. Then comes the decapitation motif. At first it shocks. The sudden, brutal loss of Charlie's head under the pole. Later it returns again and again, Annie's headless body levitating. The grandmother's corpse crowned but decapitated. Decapitation here is not random horror, it is sacrifice, the severing of identity, the offering of selfhood. In occult terms, the head is the seat of reason, the crown of individuality. To remove it is to strip the soul bare, to reduce the human to vessel. In the film, every head that falls is not death but contract. Each decapitation is a ritual payment, a signature in bloodless ink. The altar anchors this architecture. It's built within the Graham house, surrounded by candles and relics. It is both domestic and sacred. The altar is where the personal collapses into the cosmic, where grief is transmuted into invocation. The photographs, the symbols, the offerings arranged upon it transform the house into a temple. The audience sees props. The initiated see a functioning ritual space. By filming it with reverence, the camera itself becomes participant, and so does every eye that watches. Sound functions as symbol too. Silence in Hereditary is not absence, but presence, oppressive, suffocating, charged with meaning. The clicking of Charlie's tongue emerges as auditory sigil, a sound repeated until it brands itself into memory. It functions exactly like a magical word of power, meaningless to the rational ear, irresistible to the unconscious. Each click summons dread, each silence amplifies it, until the viewer is conditioned to respond automatically. This is symbol made of sound, ritual transcribed into vibration. Even mundane objects become sigils once placed within the ritual frame. A photograph marked with strange runes, a miniature dollhouse echoing the real house, candle flickering at precise moments. None of these are accidents. They're crafted symbols, embedded in the film's visual language to bypass narrative and speak directly to the body. To see them is to be marked. The conscious mind dismisses them as details. The unconscious receives them as commands. The genius of this symbolic language is that it mirrors the Gotia. Just as a magician cannot summon without sigil, the film cannot conjure its effect without imagery. Just as demons are bound by seals, viewers are bound by recurring motifs. The crown, the triangle, the altar, the decapitation, each functions as glyph, repeated until the ritual is complete. By the end of the film, the pattern has been internalized. The viewer carries the sigil within, whether or not they believe. This explains why Hereditary unsettles more deeply than ordinary horror. It does not merely show violence, it imprints ritual. The audience is not frightened by accident, they are conditioned. The language of symbols circumvents skepticism. You may not believe in demons, but your body responds to symbols anyway. Fear blooms, unease lingers, the imagery returns in dreams. This is the function of sigils, to implant, to command, to echo beyond the moment of encounter. Consider also how these symbols interlock. Triangle frames the decapitation, the altar frames the crown, the silence frames the click. Each symbol reinforces the others, weaving a net of meaning. This is precisely how occult systems operate. Multiple symbols converging to create resonance, each amplifying the power of the rest. A single glyph may stir the mind. A network of them constructs a reality. Hereditary functions not as story, but as symbolic system, every element reinforcing the ritual. And finally, the viewer themselves becomes symbol. The act of watching, of staring into the screen, is transformed into gaze's offering. The eyes become candles, the breath becomes chant, the silence of the theater becomes sacred space. In this sense, the ultimate sigil is the audience's own attention. It is the bloodless sacrifice that completes the ritual. Without you, the circle is incomplete. With you, the crown descends. So the language of Hereditary is not spoken, but carved, painted, whispered, clicked. It is the language of symbols, identical to that of grimoires. To watch is to read it, whether you choose to or not. And once it is read, it cannot be forgotten. The sigil remains, etched not on parchment, but on the mind. From the earliest temples carved in stone to the fragile parchment of medieval grimoires, one principle repeats with merciless clarity. Nothing of power is ever given freely. Every gift is paid for, every invocation costs, and the oldest currency is blood. But in Hereditary, blood does not spill in torrents of gore. Sacrifice is subtler, deeper. It is grief, attention, memory, and identity itself. The film demonstrates that in the modern ritual, the body bleeds less than the soul. When Charlie's head is severed in that sudden, shocking moment, the camera does not linger on gore. Instead, it lingers on silence. The sacrifice is not spectacle, but void. The audience sits paralyzed, aware that something irreversible has been taken. The currency here is innocence. A child has been offered, and the altar is the asphalt of a lonely road. The cult within the film required blood, but the true payment extracted is the annihilation of family, the disintegration of love. This is no accident, it is architecture. Throughout the story, Annie the mother hemorrhages not from wounds, but from grief. Each breakdown, each scream, each shudder is another offering placed upon the invisible altar. She becomes the priestess who bleeds emotion rather than flesh. Her paintings, her miniatures, even her words become vessels of sacrifice. She is emptied of peace, her body intact, but her essence leaking. The predators of the astral do not hunger for crimson only. They crave the anguish that seeps from a soul collapsing under loss. Annie's blood is her grief, poured drop by drop until nothing remains. Peter, the eventual vessel, pays in another currency, identity. By the end, he is hollowed out, no longer son, no longer self. His screams at the climax echo not merely terror, but surrender. The body remains, but the occupant is gone. In ritual terms, he has been bled dry not of veins, but of ego. The crown placed upon his head is both coronation and epitaph. His blood was his name, his sense of self, and it has been drained completely. Even the grandmother, dead before the story begins, is still currency. Her corpse becomes offering, her body arranged as relic, her memory weaponized. She bleeds across generations, her legacy extracted for power long after her flesh decayed. This is the darkest dimension of Hereditary. Blood is never limited to one life. The cult harvests across lineage, consuming entire family lines as if they were veins to be tapped. And what of the audience? Your payment is attention. To watch the film is to offer a steady stream of awareness, the most precious form of modern essence. Every lingering shot, every unbearable silence is designed to hold you captive, to make you bleed time and concentration. In the occult, candles are burned as offerings. In cinema, your attention burns instead. The flame is in your eyes, the wax is your patience, the smoke is your unease. You walk away not decapitated, not wounded, yet something of you has been extracted. The ritual is complete because you have paid with your gaze. Blood as currency takes many forms. For Annie, it is emotional collapse. For Peter, it is the surrender of identity. For Charlie, it is innocence cut short. For the grandmother, it is lineage and legacy. For the audience, it is attention surrendered. Each transaction feeds the architecture. Each sacrifice builds the throne. And once the crown descends, you realize that none of this was random. It was the slow draining of essence from every participant until the king's vessel was ready. The brilliance of Hereditary lies in its honesty about cost. Most horror films give you spectacle without sacrifice, blood splashed without consequence. But here, every drop matters. Every scream is tithe, every silence is debt collected. The Godia warns that to summon a king is to pay dearly, and Ari Aster shows us that payment not in gore, but in unraveling humanity. The wider reflection is chilling. In our own world, blood is still currency, though rarely physical. We bleed attention into screens, emotion into algorithms, identity into corporations, memory into systems of control. Our essence is extracted daily, and we call it entertainment, work, duty. The predators are not cloaked cultists, but invisible systems, draining vitality as surely as any demon. Hereditary terrifies, because it reveals this truth beneath the mask of story. So when the final crown is placed, when the ritual ends, and when the music swells like a hymn, we understand. The payment has been made. Blood has flowed, though no one wields a knife. Essence has been drained, though no one collapsed in gore. Sacrifice has occurred, and it is total. Because blood in its truest sense was never only red. It was always the substance of the self, and the self has been consumed. Every invocation, whether performed in a midnight cloister or hidden inside a cinema, requires a pact, a dais. Godia insists that demons are not called without agreement, that each king or duke obeys not out of affection, but out of contract. The circle drawn in chalk is the courtroom, the sigil, the signature, the incantation, the binding clause. In Hereditary, this ancient logic repeats only here. The grimoire is a screenplay, the circle is the camera, and the pact is signed with your attention. The Graham family is ensnared in a contract that was written long before the film begins. The grandmother, matriarch of the hidden cult, seals her descendants into an agreement they did not choose. Charlie is marked from birth as vessel. Annie is bound as officiant. Peter is condemned as throne. None of them consent consciously, yet the pact is binding. This is the cruelty of demonic contracts. Awareness is irrelevant. What matters is lineage, ritual, structure. The clauses are inherited, and the bloodline itself is the ink, the cult within the narrative. Every act is contract fulfillment. The severed head of Charlie is not accident, but clause enacted. Annie's possession and eventual decapitation is not madness, but payment. Peter's collapse into hollowed vessel is not tragedy, but coronation. The crown itself is the signature of completion, a seal declaring that all conditions have been met. The cultists bow in triumph not because they have tricked anyone, but because the contract has reached its final article. Yet the more unsettling realization is that the contract does not stop with the characters. It extends outward, into the theater, into your living room, into your eyes. To watch is to agree. The film is structured like a legal document, written in symbols and emotions. Each frame, each sound, each silence functions as a clause. And your sustained attention is the signature that activates it. The moment you surrender focus, you are no longer spectator, but signatory. The camera acts as circle. In ritual magic, the circle is drawn to mark sacred space, to both protect the summoner and contain the summoned. In cinema, the camera frames a rectangle that functions the same way. It tells you, inside this space, the rules are different. What happens here is sealed, bounded, binding. When you watch, you step inside the circle. You enter willingly, even if you call it entertainment. The screenplay is grimoire. Its instructions are precise. Where silence falls, where symbols appear, where sacrifices unfold. The director follows it as priesthood liturgy. The actors recite their lines as invocations. The sequence of scenes is not arbitrary but ritual order. Each event builds on the last, like clauses in a contract moving toward conclusion. By the time the crown descends, you realize the entire film has been one long summoning, and your attention is the signature. Without it, the ritual collapses. A spell not witnessed is inert. A contract unsigned is void. But with your gaze fixed, your breath held, your unease growing, you become the final participant. The cult within the story and the cult outside the story merge. You are the witness that completes the contract. The enthronement of Paimon occurs not only in Peter, but in the collective audience, in the consciousness that has been harnessed, bound, directed. This reveals the deepest horror of Hereditary. It is not content with frightening you. It enlists you. You believe you are safe in the dark. But in truth, you are inside the ritual, fulfilling your role as witness. Contracts in the astral are binding not because of belief, but because of participation. And to participate, you need only to give attention. By watching, you agreed. This logic mirrors the hidden contracts of our world. Every time you scroll terms of service without reading, you sign. Every time you click accept, you bind yourself. Every time you attend without reflection, you pay. Modern systems operate on the same merciless principle as the Godia. Silence is consent. Tension is agreement. Participation is contract. You are bound not because you believe, but because you act. In this way, Hereditary is a perfect mirror of our condition. The cult is not alien, it is a reflection of systems we live in daily. Families inherit obligations they never chose. Citizens obey laws they never wrote. Consumers give data through rituals of scrolling and liking, unaware of the contracts they have already signed. The architecture of possession is not confined to demons, it is embedded in every system that demands obedience. The inversion is chilling. We imagine contracts as safety, agreements that bind others to honor terms. But in the astral and in Hereditary, the contract is trap. The clauses are written in language we cannot read, symbols, silences, inevitabilities. By the time we realize what we agreed to, the crown has already descended. The film does not ask permission, it assumes it. The ritual does not wait for belief, it harvests participation. And so the audience leaves the theater unsettled, unable to explain why the unease lingers. It is not simply because of violence or loss. It is because they sense they have agreed to something, that they have signed a pact without knowing. The sigils have been imprinted, the silence has been binding, the gaze has been offering. They are not merely disturbed, they are contracted. This is the revelation. The true horror of Hereditary is contractual. The film is not a story, but a pact disguised as entertainment. Its altar is the screen, its circle the frame, sigils, the symbols that pass unnoticed. It's offering your attention, and its seal the crown that completes the ritual you thought you were watching. In truth, you were signing, and the clause that remains echoes long after the credits. The pact is not confined to Peter. It waits for anyone willing to surrender identity, anyone willing to watch without seeing, anyone willing to bleed attention as currency. In other words, it waits for all of us. We are taught to divide the world into clean categories: good versus evil, salvation versus damnation, God versus demon. Such binaries give comfort because they let us believe that we know where we stand. But the ritual of Hereditary collapses these walls. What looks like evil may be order. What looks like tragedy may be coronation. What looks like possession may be liberation. If not for the individual, then for the system that demanded his surrender. This is the inverted moral code. The recognition that what terrifies one layer of reality sustains another. Peter, the unwilling vessel, is destroyed by the film's end. His identity is stripped, his family annihilated, his screams echo into silence. To us, this reads as ultimate horror, the annihilation of the self. Yet to the cult, this is fulfillment. Their decades of ritual are complete, their chosen king enthroned, their architecture crowned. The same act is both damnation and triumph, horror and salvation, depending on where you stand. This duality is the essence of inversion. The Godia insists that kings like Paimon grant knowledge, obedience, and power. To those who summon him, his arrival is blessing. To the vessel, it is destruction. In Hereditary, this paradox is acted out with surgical precision. Annie sees her family collapse. Peter sees his identity dissolve. The audience sees nightmare, but the cultists bow in joy, praising their king. Who is right? Both. In the inverted moral code, categories collapse. Evil is only perspective. Even the motifs echo this inversion. Decapitation is not merely violence it is offering, the removal of selfhood so the vessel can be purified. The crown is not rewarded as curse, a sign that autonomy has ended. Silence is not absence, is presence, a sacred stillness charged with meaning. Each symbol flips moral expectation. What we call mutilation, the cult calls sacrifice. What we call horror, they call completion. This logic mirrors social systems. Governments demand obedience and call it virtue. Rebellion is condemned as crime. Corporations demand loyalty and call it brand culture. Dissent is punished as betrayal. Religions demand faith and call it salvation. Doubt is condemned as sin. In each case, the moral code is not absolute, but inverted to serve the system's survival. Possession in Hereditary reflects this perfectly. To the individual, it is horror. To the system, it is triumph. The inversion is not accidented, is the logic of control. Consider Annie's grief. We see a mother collapsing under unbearable loss. Her screams tear through the house, her sanity unravels. Yet in the ritual structure, her breakdown is necessary. Her despair fuels the summoning, her collapse is liturgy. What she experiences as destruction is, to the cult, a sacrifice willingly accepted. Inverted morality converts anguish into offering, pain into progress. Annie bleeds identity, but the system thrives on it. Or take Peter's final silence. He crashes through the window, body broken, breath shallow. For a moment he seems free, the nightmare ended. But then the crown descends. The boy is gone, the king enthroned. What we see as loss of self is framed as apotheosis. The cult does not mourn Peter's death, they celebrate Paimon's rebirth. The inversion is complete. The same moment is simultaneously funeral and coronation. The most unsettling implication is that the audience is subjected to the same inversion. We feel horror, unease, despair. Yet the ritual requires those emotions. Our fear is not wasted as offering. Our attention is not neutral, it is contract. By participating, by letting symbols bypass our defenses, we help complete the ritual. We call it entertainment. In inverted moral code, it is worship. This is why Hereditary unsettles more deeply than jump scares or gore. It doesn't just frighten it. It forces you to question your position in the ritual. Are you spectator or participant, victim or celebrant? You leave the theater with unease because you have inhabited both roles at once, recoiled at Peter's fate, yet you also carried the ritual to completion by watching. Inverted morality leaves you complicit. Such inversion is not confined to cinema. It is the operating system of power itself. Wars are fought and called peace. Surveillance is sold as safety. Exploitation is named opportunity. In each case, Horror to the individual is triumph to the system. Hereditary makes this truth visceral by cloaking it in demonology, but the mechanism is ancient and familiar. Possession is not just a supernatural event. It is a metaphor for obedience, for the erasure of self by forces greater than you. The inverted moral code whispers that evil is not what you think it is. Evil is not simply monstrous violence. It is the reorganization of reality in which your suffering sustains a larger architecture. Good is not simple salvation. It is complicity with systems that feed on sacrifice. To see this is to lose innocence, but also to gain clarity. And perhaps this is why the film lingers, because somewhere inside, we recognize the pattern. We know we live within inversions every day. We know that our obedience is painted as virtue, our rebellion painted as crime. We know that our sacrifices are called necessary, while those who benefit bow in silent triumph. Hereditary terrifies because it shows us, with ritual precision, that the same law governs both demons and institutions. What destroys you may sustain the throne. The crown gleams faintly in the darkness. To Peter, it is curse. To the cult, it is blessing. To you, it is question. The inverted moral code demands you ask, whose morality have you been living by, and what throne has your suffering already built? When we hear the word ritual, we imagine cloaked figures in basements or mountain caves, circles etched in chalk, candles burning low, chants rising against the dark. But ritual is never limited to those hidden corners. Ritual saturates the modern world camouflaged as culture, entertainment, tradition, and art. Hereditary makes this painfully clear. You think you are watching a film, but in truth, you are participating in a rite. And once you begin to see it, you realize that cinema itself, and the wider machinery of pop culture, is nothing but ritual scaled to a planetary level. The camera becomes the magic circle. Its frame binds and separates, telling you, inside here, laws are different. Just as magicians once drew protective circles to summon spirits, the director draws rectangles of light to summon visions. The screenplay functions as grimoire, with precise instructions for when silence should fall, when sigils should appear, when sacrifices should unfold. Actors serve as officiants, their bodies carrying the incantations of the text. The soundtrack is chant, weaving emotion, raising energy, guiding attention like a spell. To sit in the audience is not passive, it is to sit within the circle, eyes wide, offering attention as incense. Hereditary makes this explicit. Every click of Charlie's tongue is an auditory sigil, every crown an icon, every decapitation an offering. But this is only one instance. Once your eyes are opened, you see the same ritual logic everywhere. Horror films repeat archetypes like priests repeating liturgy, the sacrifice, the witness, the rebirth. Blockbusters function as collective invocations, their franchises becoming egregores, fed by billions of eyes. Music concerts summon masses into circles of light, where chants echo through arenas and ecstasy surges like a possession. Fashion runways repeat the steps of ceremonial processions. Even sports games begin with hymns, flags, and synchronized movement. Ritual is not gone, it has only changed costume. Consider pop music videos. They are drenched in symbolism. Triangles, eclipses, blood-red backdrops, angelic wings, and demonic horns. Directors insist it is aesthetic, but the effect is unmistakably ritualistic. The repetition of these motifs across countless videos, across decades, builds an egregious astral thought form that thrives on collective attention. The fans chanting lyrics, the artists moving through choreographed gestures, these are not accidents. They're ceremonies that bind millions into shared vibration. Cinema functions as global temple. Screens become altars, theaters become sanctuaries, and box office numbers measure devotion. Just as cultists in Hereditary bow before Paimon, modern audiences bow before glowing rectangles. We laugh when commanded, cry when summoned, shudder when signaled. We call it entertainment, but in the astral, it registers as ritual. Collective energy focused, channeled, harvested. Even politics understands this language. Campaign rallies mimic church ceremonies with banners, chants, hymns of allegiance. Leaders are crowned not with golden circlets, but with symbolic gestures, raised hands, oaths spoken before masses. The moral code may declare these secular, but the mechanics are sacred. repetition, attention, sacrifice. The ingredients of ritual remain unchanged. The brilliance and terror of Hereditary is that it unmasks this truth without ever saying it aloud. By drawing its story as ritual, by showing us a cult disguised as family tragedy, it forces us to ask, how many of our own entertainments are rituals we do not recognize? When you watch a film, attend a concert, scroll through endless feeds of symbols, whose ceremony are you joining? Whose throne are you helping to build? Because ritual always crowns something. In Hereditary, the ritual crowns Paimon. In our world, the rituals crown egregores, nations, corporations, ideologies, celebrities. The throne may not be carved from bone, but it is no less real. The energy rises, the sacrifice is paid, and the crown descends. You are told you are spectator, but you are cultist, witness, participant. This realization is unnerving because it reveals how little is accidental. Why does a pop star's stage echo a temple? Why do films repeat the same archetypes? Why do corporations brand themselves with sigils that bypass thought and command loyalty? Because the astral system demands ritual, because symbols are language, because attention is currency. Whether we know it or not, we perform the same invocations that grimoires recorded centuries ago. The inverted moral code makes it darker still. What you think of as harmless is actually sacrificial. Hours spent binge-watching are offerings of life force. Screams in theaters are chants of energy. Emotional breakdowns over fictional characters are libations of grief. None of it is wasted. The system collects, structures, amplifies. Every ritual feeds an egregore, and the egregore in turn demands more ritual. That's why rituals are everywhere. They are the operating system of reality. The astral feeds on repetition. And human culture is nothing if not repetition formalized. To wake, to dress, to salute, to chant, to watch, to scroll all, are ceremonies, each summoning forces unseen. The cult in Hereditary is not strange, it is honest. It enacts openly what we perform unconsciously every day. And this is the revelation. You cannot escape ritual, you are always inside it. The only choice is whether you perform it blindly, feeding powers you do not name, or whether you awaken, recognizing the ceremony as it unfolds around you. To see ritual everywhere is to see the hidden architecture of life. And once seen, the spell weakens. Hereditary leaves us with this haunting recognition. You were never just audience, you were efficient. You were never just spectator, you were cultist. The rituals are not confined to screen or temple, they are woven into the fabric of modern life. Every screen is an altar, every symbol is a sigil, every repetition is a spell. Rituals are everywhere, and you are always inside the circle. Awakening rarely feels like triumph. More often, it feels like nausea, as though the floor beneath you has shifted and you realize you were never standing on solid ground. Hereditary leaves its viewers with exactly this sensation. Long after the credits roll, the silence lingers, the imagery gnaws. And somewhere deep inside, you suspect the true horror is not that Paimon was enthroned in Peter, but that you too were drawn into the circle. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The system revealed by the film is not unique to cinema. It is the architecture of ritual itself. Hierarchy built on sacrifice, contracts disguised as stories, symbols smuggled into consciousness, attention harvested as currency. For most, this machinery operates invisibly, like the air we breathe. But to awaken is to glimpse the gears turning, to see the strings pulled, to recognize that every gesture of obedience, every repetition of ritual, every offering of focus feeds something larger than you. In the world of the Godia, kings like Paimon are not summoned by accident. They arrive only through precise ceremonies, long preparation, and willing or unwilling sacrifice. Hereditary shows us that the same law governs the rituals of modern culture. Films, concerts, political rallies, social media, all of them are circles drawn around us. We think we are free spectators, but in truth we are efficients, our attention woven into the spell. Awakening is the moment you realize your gaze is not passive. It is participation. It is consent. It is contract. This realization is terrifying because it robs you of innocence. You can no longer pretend you are untouched. You can no longer imagine yourself as safe observer. You have been participant all along. The crown hovering above Peter's head is also hovering above yours. Not because you will be possessed by a demon, but because your silence, your repetition, your offering of time already enthroned something. Every system crowns its king. The only question is which one you serve. Yet awareness is also the first form of resistance. Just as in exorcisms the act of naming strips power from the spirit, so too does recognition weaken the spell. To see the crown is to deny its invisibility. To name the sigil is to break its secrecy. To admit the contract is to begin renegotiating its terms. The cult thrives on unconscious obedience. Awareness fractures its hold. This is why ancient grimoires were so dangerous. They did not simply list demons. They revealed the architecture of summoning, the mechanics of binding. To study them was to risk seeing too much, to realize the thinness of the veil between ritual and daily life. Hereditary functions the same way. It unveils the ritual embedded in narrative. Once you recognize it, you begin to see it everywhere. The click of Charlie's tongue echoes in every auditory brand jingle. Crown gleaming in the final scene resonates with every coronation of celebrity and ideology. The decapitations remind you of every sacrifice of identity demanded by institutions. The film is not closed, it is a lens that makes the hidden system visible. But awakening is not gentle. It comes with despair. You realize you cannot step outside ritual because ritual is the medium of reality. You cannot cease participation because every breath is offering, every thought is symbol, every repetition is invocation. The question is not whether you perform rituals, it is whether you know whose ritual you are inside. Without awareness, you remain cultist, feeding powers unseen. With awareness, you may begin to redirect, to withhold, to resist. The final inversion is this. Possession is not only horror, it is also mirror. To awaken is to admit you have always been possessed by desires, by systems, by symbols. You are not empty vessel awaiting invasion. You are ritual incarnate. The predators and kings only exploit what was already there. The crown descends easily because you were already bowing. So awakening is not exorcism, it is confrontation. It is standing before the dweller at your own threshold, admitting the contract you signed blindly, acknowledging the rituals you performed unconsciously. It is refusing to pretend you are innocent. And in that refusal, a strange freedom flickers. For the first time, you are no longer blind participant. You are witness with eyes open. You are a cultist who knows the liturgy. You are a summoner who sees the sigil you have drawn. This is the rebellion hidden inside awareness. You may not escape the circle, but you can redraw its lines. You may not silence the symbols, but you can read them. You may not break the system, but you can weaken the spell by refusing to believe it invisible. The cult loses power when you see its architecture. The king loses mystique when you recognize the crown. The ritual stumbles when the officiant opens their eyes. And so the unease that lingers after Hereditary is not curse but invitation. It asks, what rituals are you performing without knowing? Whose throne are you building with your attention? What contracts have you signed with silence? Awakening is not comfortable, but it is necessary. For to remain blind is to remain bound. To see is to begin to resist. The spell weakens the moment you realize you are inside it. The crown glitters, but you may yet refuse to bow. The sigil burns, but you may yet read it instead of fearing it. The ritual continues, but you may yet awaken to the system and in doing so. You steal back the one thing the cult cannot survive without, your unconscious obedience. The crown in Hereditary was never meant only for Peter, it waits for anyone who surrenders without seeing. Every silence, every gaze, every repetition is a contract. If this ritual unsettled you, leave a comment, subscribe, and return because the next circle is already being drawn.